Welcome to the Tell Me series, a new podcast series with the goal to look outside our bubbles and rekindle our childlike curiosity about the world. My name is Rana Kripani, and you're listening to the Tell Me series. Have you ever talked to someone and then left the conversation thinking, wow, that felt amazing? I had that very experience with today's guest. She was my mentee at UConsulting, the #1 consulting-related student organization at UCLA. Although we both boarded the same ship into the corporate world, her passion for health and wellness steered her onto new seas. She now helps people transform themselves to design and live the life they desire through her life coaching service, Anna Be Well. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce a great friend and one of the most interesting people I know, Anna Bothe. Anna, welcome to the show.
Aw, I thank you for having me. That introduction is, I feel good. I'm excited. You're lovely.
You too. Always happy to have you. I don't know if you remember how we first met, but as I recall, we both met at the mentorship event for UConsulting, and it was almost like speed dating for those of you who haven't been aware of that. It's you get a bunch of seniors and a bunch of juniors, and you just tell them talk for 2 minutes each and see what happens. So when we spoke, you mentioned you loved long distance running and that you had a strict diet, and that got me pretty fixated on the idea of this girl's very disciplined and she knows her stuff. So you've been passionate about health and wellness for quite a long time now. Where did that passion stem from, and how has it evolved over time?
That is an excellent question. I have been passionate about health since high school, I would say, but it has drastically changed my views on health, what that actually means, and how one achieves it. Because in high school, I think I was driven by this concept of outward looks, and that is health. When you have the abs, when you have the body, and you are able to perform at a high level in whatever physical feats that you're taking on. And so I looked at training and I looked at my physique to see if I was meeting health standards. And I knew very little about things like how your energy should be, how your body temperature should be, how your mood should be, how your hormones should be if you are at a healthy state. And so initially I, was, like you said, very fixated on diet and exercise, because to me, those were like the basis of health and everything built off of that. And I still agree to a large part, but I now know that there's so much more to the equation. And I think that's also what's kept my passion for health and well-being alive, is how my understanding has grown and how there's always something more to learn that's outside of those two topics. Because I mastered those over the couple of years that I had to really dive into that. And then I was like, okay, what else is there? Because I got bored and I kind of got frustrated because I put so much emphasis on those two pillars and I completely missed the point. And so my experience, or the outcome of that investment in my health, was kind of subpar in terms of what I thought I should be getting. I put all this effort into running those miles and eating the healthiest way I knew how, and I still didn't feel like I was on top of the world. And everyone talked about, like, that's how you should feel. So that really set me off on the next part of my journey, which was about, like the mind. And our mental health is a huge part of our health. And our spiritual health is a huge part of our health. And so now my philosophy and in the work that I do, I really make sure we address the whole human and not just the food part of the human and the exercise of the human. Like, those are important pieces too, and we'll always talk about it. But how you show up in your relationship with food and exercise is determined by your mind and your spiritual health. And I've read a lot of very interesting books talking about how the way a woman eats will tell you basically everything you need to know about what she believes about the world and herself. And when I read that statement, it just hit home for me because it was so true. And I think if we look within ourselves deeply enough and with enough honesty, we can also find that to be true. So my passion has evolved over the years. It started very much at that surface level of how you eat and how you move, and is now much deeper with like how connected are you to your life's purpose, how connected are you in your relationships, how connected are you to your understanding of self and your commitment to living a life that feels incredibly good, but has, a part to do with movement and exercise, but a larger part to do with your mindset and how you view the world.
So is it fair to say you started thinking on the external and over time you've moved internally?
Yep.
And that internal journey.
I can always count on you to I was going to say, I can always count on you to say it so succinctly. That's exactly it. Yeah.
I think that's what we're trained to do in consulting. Look at a bunch of text and simplify.
You're much better at that than I.
It's just practice. That's all it is. So there's a lot of awareness on the external side and not enough on the internal. So how about we talk a bit about the external first, since that's what a lot of people have some idea about. Regarding awareness on diet, it sometimes feels, to me at least, that there's almost information overload. Like I've heard about keto, paleo, vegan, intermittent fasting, and the list goes on. What diets have you tried in the past, and what are you trying right now?
What haven't I tried? I tried the blood type diet. I tried Whole30. I tried carnivore diet. I've tried veganism. I've tried pescatarianism. I've tried intermittent fasting. I've tried keto and the primal blend between keto and paleo. And I've tried no diet at all. So I think there's been some that I tried for longer and some that I tried for shorter periods of time. But right now, I guess the best way to explain it is I eat intuitively, but that is such an overused term and it means a million things to different people. So the way that I will explain it in my context of my own life is I have just developed such an awareness around how food makes me feel and what I naturally want from my body just kind of leads me to where I need to go, that I've defined what food is for me versus what food I think is kind of known to be today, which is like ultra processed. You couldn't recognize it as food from the earth. So I defined food for myself and I then allow my body to select from that option of food. And it's been such a long time since I've had hyperpalatable things that it doesn't crave those things unnaturally because I just only know what food is for my body. And therefore I eat according to that. So it's not a diet, but in terms of like the Latin explanation, like what I eat intuitively, but that happens to be right now a plant-based diet. So it's whole foods plant-based is usually how it's described, meaning not any animal products currently, because my body just doesn't seem to jive with those. And so I use the term whole food plant-based because that's largely what you would see on my plate.
That's fair to say. You mentioned you've developed an intuition of sorts, and I'm assuming the intuition comes over, months and months of paying attention to how your body feels.
Mm-hmm.
And years. Well, good luck, everyone. Well, for the people trying to get started. I was just slow. For the people trying to get started on developing their intuition, would you recommend keeping like a log on how you felt after each meal, or what's a good system to keep in track what's going on with your body?
Yeah, this will be very different for every person depending on your health history and your mindset around food and past. So for those that are just starting out and they might not have a restrictive past with food, meaning they had really rigid rules around what was okay and what wasn't okay, developing your intuition with food could look like having a log where you take a moment, or maybe you have an alert on your phone where an hour after you eat, you check in with yourself, which could look like just taking a breath in and out to get into the parasympathetic state and really relaxing and kind of getting into that meditative state and tuning in, which looks like just placing your awareness inside your body and asking, how do I feel right now? And some of the things to look for are, what is my energy like? Both physically and mentally. Do I feel anxious? Do I feel calm? Do I feel satisfied? Do I feel tired? And noting just those qualities without judgment, how you feel. Because around like that hour mark, the sugar high might have worn off and your blood sugar is kind of working to manage, okay, well, what are the next hours going to be like based on that meal? So it's a good time to just check in with yourself, and then maybe another 3 hours later, noting if you're hungry again, or if you're still really uncomfortably full, have you used the restroom? And so it's taking in some of those taking inventory of some of those biomarkers around what your digestion is like in the time since you've eaten, what your energy is like, and also how your mood is, because food really does affect our mood. And just noting those, and those, I think 3 things are digestion, mood, and energy. If you can check in with yourself an hour and 3 hours later after a meal, that'll tell you a whole lot about how that food affected you. And just awareness as the base is always the first step.
If I had to sum it up, it's very, very important to just slow down and look inward. Mm-hmm. I think we're living in the times where there's just a lot going on. There's a lot more things distracting us. If you're living and working from home, then you might have kids running around everywhere. Trying to take care of yourself is another challenge altogether. So I think just pausing just for a minute to reflect can pay dividends over the long run.
Absolutely. The one thing I'll add to that, though, is because our society does have a quick pace, and when I say society, I think that's kind of a world scale society. Like, we're just focused more on the doing than we are on the being. And so when we take that, that advice to pause and slow down, what that often looks like is our body kind of becoming aware of how stressed we are, and it doesn't always feel good. Like, the reason why we continue to egg on this cycle oftentimes is if we do slow down, we realize how good or how not great we feel. And so a good tool for someone who is leading a more stressed life and is being asked to slow down is to use breath work, because it aids our biology. It puts us in the parasympathetic state. Our mind can, become aware of our body, but how do we get our body to a place of calm is really the goal, because then our mind can search, the calmer waters for how we feel and what's the root. But if we're still stressed and the mind's just looking at that, all we see is stress, and we're not going to get the clarity we actually want.
I see. I think I have a good analogy for that. Something that comes to mind is, when you throw a rock in a pond and it creates a bunch of ripples. And when you're looking down at the pond, you don't see an image of yourself. You just see a very distorted image, because the ripples have created that. But if you let the rock settle, then the image becomes clear.
Yep. And to add to that, you get to see to the bottom of the water. And if you want to bring it back to food, you get to see, okay, so that was the food I ate. And now clearly I can see, I don't think that this is just the stress issue. I think it's this kind of food. And you'll just get better at it over time, noticing what combinations make you feel good. And it does require trial and error. So just being very gentle with yourself and saying, I'm not maybe going to figure it out today, but every little thing I do each day will add up over time. And as someone who struggled with this that's why I say years, like being where I am today, I'm just so grateful for like knowing how food makes me feel and having this very empowered state of mind where I can use food as medicine. I can use food to aid me in the goals that I have for my life, which is, this energy and zest for an exciting and meaningful life.
How do you feel about companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, which, aim to create a plant-based alternative to meat?
I am not a huge fan of them because I think we're still missing the point, right? Like, it's not about creating substitutes for things that are now deemed unhealthy. Like, it's about getting back to pure foods from the earth that require minimal processing that our bodies can interpret because it's in accordance with our biology, and it's creating that relationship with foods from the earth that over time start to feel as good as a steak. Because some people, the reason why they came about is because people were like, well, I want to have the experience of eating meat, but I also now feel like I shouldn't be eating meat. So this is the alternative that I have, and it's pretty good. And they've done a really good job at making those meats taste like real meat. But it's like, okay, well, you're still longing for meat. You're still in some way saying, I'm being deprived of something. Let me find a replacement for it. Versus saying, I'm not being deprived of anything. My life is full of an abundant source of foods from the earth. And like, if you've tasted a ripe mango or a delicious papaya or a watermelon on a summer day, like, you're not necessarily craving a steak in that moment because you're so satisfied. And so it's about, and this is the hard work. It's hard work. Sometimes it can be a struggle because of our minds, but like, when we can train ourselves to embrace the things that are meant to satisfy us and kind of beat those cravings for a time, then we end up in a place that feels so abundant and like we're missing out on nothing. And so those companies, I think they are trying to help people gravitate towards that plant-based eating and kind of create a bridge. But the issue I have is like, it's a fine placeholder if it had none of the industrial seed oils and none of the stuff that our bodies are actually harmed by. So if we're taking away, like, because meat is a whole food and we're putting in a processed substitute, I think we're still canceling out the point, which is like to get to a healthier place. So in my mind, I'm like, if you have a processed meat that's from Whole Foods and it's ground up and it tastes like meat and that helps you get to wherever you're trying to go for health, that's great. But if it has things in it that you're like not benefiting by, then I think you're still kind of shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. So would you say it's more of somewhat of an illusion?
Yeah. And this is where economics comes into play too, right? Like, if we make an Impossible Burger that a company has manufactured, we're creating their profits, like we're buying into something that they can, sell, market, package, and it's going to be hyper palatable. So we're going to start craving it, and then it's going to become part of our diet. And all of a sudden they have, a huge economy on their hands off of something that never existed in nature. If we get back to nature, if we start growing food in our gardens, if we start eating plants and animals that are like coming from the earth and supporting our earth ecosystem, then there's less profit to be gained in some respects for their business model. And so it's still like, we're missing the point. We need to get back to nature. We need to get back to understanding where our food comes from, how it's made, and be part of that life cycle so we can restore our earth at the end of the day. Because like, when we think about everything that goes into manufacturing an Impossible Burger or whatever it is, it's still greenhouse gases. It's still all of these transportation costs and manufacturing costs that go into it. And part of the benefit of a plant-based diet is reducing our environmental footprint. And so I think we're still not getting to the point where we need to be.
So basically you're saying we need to get to the roots.
Yes.
I had to do it. I'm sorry. I had to. Oh, you spoke about economics. So like from a purely economic point of view, like from my understanding, meat-based meals in general are quite inelastic, at least in Western countries. I know in places like India, for example, maybe like 40% of the population is vegetarian. So America tends to be one of the highest meat intake per capita.
Mm-hmm.
So from that aspect, I think what Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat are doing are at least shifting the mindset. Like some external help's going to be needed for that, shift in demand to occur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's a lever that we're pulling, right? It's like, we're drawing awareness to our meat consumption, and we're providing an alternative to kind of help folks, just explore. And I call this in terms of like human behavior, the expansion process, right? It's showing our brains that there is another way of doing things. And hey, this isn't so different than what you were already doing. And so asking someone to say, maybe you're having meat 3 times a day, asking them to completely remove it the next day, not only is that going to be hard for their brains to adopt as a new behavior, but it's also kind of hard for our biology to be like, okay, well, one day I was having this 3 times a day and all of a sudden we're not. And it's going to like be playing catch up. So what this industry has done is like, hey, we'll put like a little, stepping stool in between so you can get to the other side. And this is just a nice placeholder. And in terms of like the economy, it's been a huge cash cow, like, if you will. It's like plant-based protein powders, plant-based, like, because that's what our capitalistic state does, right? It's like, oh, we can make money here. We can create a package and like, because everyone wants to be part of a tribe. Yeah. And we've like, oh, I'm like, have you tried the Impossible Burger? It's a conversation piece versus like, hey, have you tried a cucumber before? Like, it's awesome. Less people are doing that than like, have you tried this new thing? Or have you tried paleo puffs? And it's a conversation topic versus like, have you tried a tomato? It just sits differently. But it also, I think, and this is an interesting thing to contemplate too, is like, if we didn't have, like any foods that came in a package or were processed or had a label on them, and we really only had like what comes from nature, how much would we actually talk about food? And like, how would our conversations change? Because I think we would still talk about like, oh, this banana was great or this was great, but I don't know if it would still have the sensationalized like energy around it, because I think what packaged and hyper palatable foods do is they create this over sensationalized like energy around it. It's like, oh, like a chip or this, and it just like lights up our brain, and therefore how we talk is representative of how our brain state is. And even when you talk about a food, it lights up those parts in your brain. So you're like, oh, like a Dorito, and you get so excited versus like a banana. But it's like, okay, I'm moving on now.
Yeah, I would say there's like a different kind of energy that comes in. Let's say I love eating chocolates. So for me, when I think of a Mars bar or a Twix, I just like the, younger Ron is like, oh yeah, this is it. So, and I still feel that even now, although I don't eat as much anymore, but that I still feel it internally, like just the thought of it, just lighting up those, dopamine centers.
Yes.
I never thought of it that way. I mean, you did mention the idea of everyone wanting to feel like they're part of a tribe. Would you think there's a way we could maybe talk about whole foods or plant-based foods in that tribal sense?
Yeah. I didn't hear a question, but I feel like I could just talk.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I think we have to be careful not to create an us versus them mentality with almost anything, because it's so part of our biology to be like, my tribe, your tribe, because we want to feel like, okay, I need to create some type of safety net for me and there's a danger. And it's just very primal, like our instinct to have our tribe and to understand who is our opposition. Our brains are very dualistic, me, them, yin, yang, that sort of thing. And so with whole foods, plant-based, it kind of came out of like the concept that veganism was a very special label that meant a lot more than just the food you eat. It's the clothes you buy. It's the way you interact with the environment. And it was a much more holistic term. And then veganism started to be used as, oh, it's just the way that I eat. I don't eat animal products, so I'm vegan. And so it kind of created a little bit of a backlash, because people who were vegan in the true sense of the word were like, well, you're kind of not still doing this, so it's tarnishing the name. And so plant-based, like whole foods plant-based came out, and they're still like plant-based and like all of these labels. And so what we're seeing is like people want a way to describe, you know, the way that they eat, so we can have an understanding when we go to dinner. Mm-hmm. You know, I need to provide this for this person. This is what they're eating. But at the same time, we have to be very careful of an us versus them, like, oh, I eat only plant-based or this or that, because our brains want to create this tribe around like, oh, you are like me, we can be friends. Like we have this thing we can like bond over, and food is such a social thing that it's like, oh, we can like eat together and we can like go to the same restaurants and you're like me, and it's a way to connect. And that can be very beautiful, but we have to be very careful not to isolate others from our group because they don't eat like we do. And also, if that style of eating starts to not work for you at some point, then you have an identity crisis, right? If you're like, I've been paleo my entire life, and all of a sudden I'm like, not, who are my friends? And it's really kind of an odd thing to say, but it's so true. And so that's another point that I want to make, is like, you can't be so attached to a label. And that's why I even hesitate to even say I'm whole foods plant-based. I say I just eat intuitively, and it happens to look like this on my plate, because I don't want someone to immediately put me in a camp and say, oh, I'm like you, or, oh, you're this way, because I always want to be open to change. And I feel like anytime we get too set in one way of doing things, life just has a way of nudging us to see like, oh, sorry, we're going to move you in this direction. And it's just not healthy to be over-identified with any label. And when we create a tribe around a label, that just further entrenches us in that label.
Yep, you've hit the nail on the head. It's very true that the world tries to label us. It's everywhere you go, regardless, whether it's your friends, family, even unconsciously, you might be labeling yourself. And the moment you identify with that label, you'll start to nudge yourself into that direction because you're trying to create an image of yourself in your head. Like, who is Anna? What does she believe in? And if you start with some labels, there are labels adjacent to that. And you might pick those up, and, you know, a year later, you might be like, wow, I don't recognize myself anymore.
Yeah. And I think one useful like perspective shift is like, a label can be like a clothing item. You try it on, maybe it makes you show up a little bit differently in the world, and that feels really good. But then at the end of the day, you take the label off, you get into your PJs, which are just neutral, and you go to sleep like everyone else. And the next day you wake up and maybe you want to put on a different shirt. And so allow yourself the flexibility to put these different labels on as a fun way to express yourself and to nudge yourself in a direction that you haven't been in previously, so you can grow and expand. And when I say this, I mean like in terms of your perspective, like being part of the true sense of the word vegan tribe is like, oh, like maybe you're going to environmental rights protests, maybe you're shopping differently. And I think that's also something that is is kind of cool is like when you start eating a new way, and because I've tried so many ways of eating, I can speak to this firsthand, is like it's so much fun going to the grocery store on the first day that you try a new way of eating, because you're like, oh, I haven't been in this aisle before, and like I can eat that, and like you like just feels like you're getting to try out a new part of yourself and become this new identity. And half of us are running away from, I'd say more than half, are running away from some part of ourselves. So trying on a new way of eating feels like we get a new lease on life, which sounds oversimplistic, but it's so true. That's why everyone's like, what are you trying this year? Are you going Whole30? Are you going this? Because it's like, who are you going to be? And how are you going to change? And we all kind of crave a change in ourselves. So I think we started out by saying, I forget the question, but that's what the point that I want to make.
I mean, that's when you know you're having a good conversation, when you forget the original question.
Yeah, I was like, I'm just into this. I don't know where it came from, but I like this.
I think that always happens whenever we speak. Like, it just goes on to something, and then at the end, I'm like, wait, what? Where did we come from? How did we get to this particular topic?
Yeah.
I was going to say, you did mention that it takes you get to have you get to be a new person whenever you walk to a new aisle. You get a new sense of a new lease on life, as you put it. Do you remember what you were like before you got onto this whole journey, and what kind of triggered that whole process?
When you say, just to clarify, when I got on this whole journey, what journey are you referring to?
I'm referring to you taking your health seriously. Okay.
I just wanted to clarify, because many journeys over here. And I kind of pause when I'm thinking about, when did I start taking my health seriously? Because as I mentioned, in high school, it was much more aesthetic based. And I would say like I took that seriously, but it wasn't health. And I've grown up my entire life in a family that valued healthy eating. Like before it was cool, always shopped at Whole Foods. My parents have grown wheatgrass in their basement to do juicing wheatgrass shots. So I've just been immersed in taking your health seriously, and my family has had different health challenges. So I've always known that it's something that you don't just get. It's something you not achieve, but like you have to continuously show up for and build. You build your health. And as a kid, I definitely didn't, want wheatgrass shots. I wanted ice cream and macaroni and cheese. And then when I realized those weren't going to get me a 6-pack, I changed to, broccoli and chicken, like standard bodybuilding kind of diet. And then I think it was when I realized that I just felt so awful and I couldn't keep living this way where it didn't feel good to live, that I was like, no, I'm serious about finding out if there's a way of eating and living and thinking that can make me feel as good as I always thought I should. And so it was kind of this pursuit of like, I think you have to hit a rock bottom sometimes in order to take anything to take something seriously. And so I hit that rock bottom and I was like, okay, like, no, I'm all in. Like, I'm going to take this a little bit more seriously. And it took like doing a lot of harm to my body for me to change. And in that change, like that journey, I think I've, as a person, changed. But like you asked who I was before then, I was still me, but I just didn't know how to get to where I wanted to go. And I had a lot of information at my fingertips, but a lot of it wasn't good information. And the piece of information I was missing is, how do you find out what works for you? And how do you make sure you're coming at this from a place of self-worth and not self-hate? Because that was a huge thing that I had to learn. So maybe the biggest difference between who I was before I took my health seriously and who I was on the journey of taking it seriously was I didn't value myself. I was insecure. I was upset and angry and suppressed a lot of emotions. And so I guess you would kind of call that, you'd call it those things.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started taking it seriously is when I started, I think, being a more caring, gentle, and loving person to myself and showing up for who I was and accepting that, than always trying to change it with some type of way of eating and finding a camp based off of how I was eating. And I had to get into the inner work piece. And so who I was when I started that journey was someone who was not necessarily fully confident in themselves, but just was committed to finding out if I could be. And then, as you mentioned, I was always disciplined. So if I set my mind to something, by golly, I was going to do it. So I'd still had that. That was still part of me.
Fair enough. What questions did you ask yourself back then? And if for all those people who are trying to take their first baby steps into this, what questions do you encourage them to ask themselves?
The first question is, am I doing this from a place of self-love, or if I'm doing this from a compensatory state of mind, meaning I messed up, I have to do this. I'm not this. I need to be this. I should be this. So are you shoulding yourself into health, or are you loving yourself into health? Because you cannot hate yourself into health. You have to love yourself there. And if you hate yourself there, I assure you, you will not arrive at a place that is true health. You will have a myriad of issues. And I can say from personal experience that is true.
Before I get to our final question, I just want to say a huge thank you for saying yes for this. You know what I also appreciate about you is that every time we talk, I always leave the conversation with more questions rather than answers. And I'm like, oh, this is just another thing to just call her again and figure out, what to do next. So it's a weird mix of, I guess, peace and excitement. Like peace because it's just, I'm calm at the end. I think that's part of your vibe. And also I'm happy that we talk a lot about the inner work. And that's super important to me. And the excitement because I know there's something else to look forward to next time.
I feel so similarly. And I'm so grateful for just your mind and soul, because your mind is creative, it's curious, and I think curiosity is the reason why we're here. But beyond just like being curious, it's also very heart-led. So you love people and you show up for people and you ask questions from that place of love versus, oh, it's just like, something to think about. But it's like, no, like this is meaningful to my life and my experience of life. And when I say meaningful, I don't mean necessarily serious, but I do mean it's a core element of what it is to be human, is to experience something that lifts our spirits, and it's to experience something that makes us think and appreciate our thinking faculties. So it's always a pleasure talking with you because you allow me to explore different parts of my mind and also explore your mind, which is just a wonderful combination.
Thanks a lot. I mean, I find it very hard to take compliments in general, but I'm getting better at that.
Just say, I receive.
I receive.
I receive that. I had to work on that too, to be like, I received that. Thank you.
So the last question of the day is based on the theme of the show. Tell me. So I'd like you to tell us, with all of your experience so far in health and wellness, what is one piece of advice or knowledge you'd like to leave us with?
I'm so long-winded that these questions are always very difficult for me. But I just want to say, first of all, like, I honor you wherever you're at in your journey. And if you're curious about health, like, allow that curiosity to lead you. Don't take it too seriously, but allow that playfulness of like, what can I feel? What can I try? And how can I show up differently in the world according to, or dependent on like how I eat and how I move and how I think, and let that playfulness and that curiosity and that, I think, like self-love at the end of the day, which means to me that you allow yourself to indulge the curiosity and playfulness to guide you, because it will bring you to a place of health. If you show up for yourself every day and ask, like, how can I honor and respect and love and enjoy my life in the best way that I know how, that will get you to good places. But don't stop asking yourself questions of like, well, is this the best way? And why do I think this? And could I try it a little bit differently? And how can I be, a little bit more exploratory or a little bit more open, or whatever that looks like for you? And just allow yourself to be guided by that place of curiosity and playfulness and love. And then if you have, a desire to learn more, there's a million resources, but don't place your intellect and ability to think critically below theirs, because they figured out something for them based on their experiences, and you need to do the same. So no one's word is gospel, including mine. Only you know what you need and what's going to work for you at the end of the day.
All right. And with that, I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone listening. And thank you, Anna, for being here. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.